Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another instalment of Revisiting, where I look back on one particular album which seems to have some significance to my life and musical development over the years. So I thought I would finally get round to doing this one, this beast. Yes, 90125, the band's 11th album, released on the 7th of November 1983, recorded between November 82 and July 83 at Psalm Studios and Air Studios. And yeah, a bit of a 80s beast, this one. There are always a few albums in your life where you look back and you can remember hearing them for the first time. I wouldn't like to say how many of those I've got on my list, but this is definitely one of them. I know exactly where I was, pretty much exactly when it was. It was in the summer of 1991. I was a student here in Lancaster and I was at a friend's house at Milkenstyle Lane, my friend Greg Clark. It was a big party. Most people were out in the garden. It was a barbecue. And I was in Greg's bedroom rifling through his CDs, you know, seeing what he had, which is something that I've always done. And I came across two records in his collection. One of them was Peter Gabriel, So, and one of them was this, 90125 by Yes. And I hadn't heard either of them at the time, even though this was 1991, so a fair few years after they'd come out. But I can remember putting on his CD of 90125 and being absolutely blown away by the track Owner of a Lonely Heart, which just has that amazing incisive sound, incredible Trevor Horn production. And I'd been a big Trevor Horn fan back in my younger days. I'd been a huge fan of the Buggles. You know, I'd loved that music. I hadn't particularly followed him after the Buggles. I subsequently learned some of the stuff that he'd been doing. Funnily enough, I had heard the Drama album, which is the album where, strangely enough, because the Buggles shared a manager with Yes, they ended up, Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes had ended up joining the band and making this one album called Drama. This was when John Anderson, the original vocalist, had left the band and they were going through a strange, tumultuous time when they were going through all these changes. I had heard Drama. That was the only Yes album I'd heard at that point. Didn't really know much of their history, and it was quite an interesting coming together, Trevor Horn and Yes. And I subsequently learned the history, and we'll get into that in a little while. One source that I've got for this video, which is a book that I do really recommend, it's a great read actually, is this one, Trevor Horn, Adventures in Modern Recording, from ABC to ZTT, which tells the complete gory story of Trevor's amazing career. You know, he kind of started out as a session bass player, really, playing around the circuit and, you know, doing advertising jingles and getting whatever work he could get. And then through a complex series of musical adventures, he ends up in this little group called the Buggles, and they get this massive #1 hit with Video Killed the Radio Star. And his career kind of flopped as a pop star after that, but of course he sort of sidetracked into production. And at the time he came to produce 90125, he hadn't yet become the huge, all-encompassing, you know, king of 80s pop. He hadn't done Frankie yet, or rather he was just about to do Frankie. The Frankie Goes to Hollywood stuff he was doing was sort of happening at about the same time as this, also at the same time that he was working with Malcolm McLaren as well. So he was doing a lot of cutting-edge stuff, but he hadn't really made a really big name for himself. He'd done the ABC album, Lexicon of Love, and he'd worked with Dollar and a few other bands, and, you know, he'd started to make inroads, and he had a very identifiable sound, which he was known for. You know, he was an early pioneer of the Fairlight synthesizer, one of the few producers in London, or in England rather, who actually knew how to use it. And he'd got his own sound, working in collaboration with the engineer Gary Langham. Jeff and Trevor and Gary had really pioneered this great panoramic sound, really synth heavy, early use of samples, and just a great vista of sound, depth of sound. But it was clearly, you know, increasingly digital and moving away from a lot of that 70s sensibility. And in some ways it was a sort of uneasy fit with the old Yes formula, but we'll get to that. So essentially what happened was, after the Drama album, which Trevor and Jeff Downes from the Buggles had done with Yes, they did a tour, North American tour, and then they disbanded essentially. And Chris Squire from Yes, he invited the original keyboard player, Tony Kaye, to form a band with him, and they were going to call it Cinema, or they did call it Cinema. And they teamed up with a South African guitarist called Trevor Horn, who was a great guitar player. And they also brought in Alan White on drums, who'd been the Yes drummer back since Tales from Topographic Oceans back in 73 or whatever. So it was it was the remnants of Yes into this kind of new project called Cinema. And at some point down the line, Chris Squire asked Trevor if he wanted to be involved with the project, and Trevor was not that keen particularly until he heard the demo, Trevor Rabin's demo of Owner of a Lonely Heart, and he was just totally knocked out by this. And he laid down a stipulation. He said, I will produce the album for you, but only if we do Owner of a Lonely Heart. And Trevor and Chris, I don't think, were too keen on that. They didn't think it was a Yes song, but that was what Trevor wanted. So for the time being, that's what Trevor got. Trevor Horn at the time, he thought the material was maybe not too Yes-like. He likened it to Styx. He had that kind of 80s arena rock, kind of AOR kind of sound. Trevor had been a big Yes fan. In fact, Yes were his favourite band of all time. He was a huge fan of Topographic Oceans. He was a prog rock fan, and you can hear that on the Buggles stuff. You know, if you listen to The Age of Plastic, you can definitely hear that that British prog sound coming through all these layers of pop music. But anyway, so Trevor makes a deal with them. They go to the studio, and the production of the album descends into this protracted production hell, really, for Trevor, and it just, absolutely, he gets bogged down. Lots of interpersonal stuff going on. I just want to read you a couple of bits from the book because I can't really do justice by paraphrasing it. He was trying to get them to agree to record his way, and in particular, he really wanted them to make a good job of this song, Owner of a Lonely Heart, because he could hear the pop sensibility that was potentially there, but the band really did not want to do it. And he says, a red mist descended, says Trevor, and he says, look, the reason I said I'd do this record is because I think we can get a hit single out of this song, and now you're telling me you don't want to do it. This was quite an outburst for me. I was literally, I'm not joking, literally down on my hands and knees pulling at Chris Squire's trousers. I was half kidding, half serious, half losing my mind, half being manipulative. Either way, I was quite a sight. Do you want to ruin me? I cried. I'm nearly the most famous producer in the world. Do you want to bring me down? Please let me program it into a drum machine. Please, please, please. There was a terrible set of arguments they were having in the studio about the drum sound. The guys in the band wanted the drums. I think it was Trevor Rabin was really taken with the Mutt Lange drum sound that he was pioneering at the time, the Def Leppard, which has this kind of deep, meaty kind of drum sound, and that's what they wanted. But what Trevor wanted was something different. He'd been really taken with the album Synchronicity by The Police, and he really loved Stuart Copeland's drum sound, which obviously is based around that kind of high, whip-cracking kind of snare, so that's what he wanted. Somehow the sessions kind of lurched on. They moved to Air Studios, where they were having to pay an hourly fee for using the studio, and Chris Squire had this reputation for always being late. He was a very late man. He'd famously pissed off Bill Bruford in the early 70s. One of the reasons that Bill said he left Yes was that he was just tired of standing around waiting for Chris Squire to arrive. And on the production of 90125, they got into Air Studios. Be on time, I told Chris. This place is £120 an hour. He was 5 hours late. I'm ashamed to say that I attacked him. The crew prevented me from punching him in the face, so instead I went after him with a pair of headphones that I pushed under his chin. So yeah, I mean, it was just one of those kind of studio sessions where you'd want to be a fly on the wall, essentially. So it all kind of finally starts to come good, and then this decision is taken that it's not going to be a Cinema album, it's going to be a Yes album. And of course, at that point, the idea is floated to bring John Anderson back to the band. I'm not quite sure what the story had been with John leaving the band back after the Tomato album, I think. But he came back to do 90125, but it was not a happy place. He was not in a happy place. He certainly did not take kindly to being bossed around by Trevor Horn. And he had a few words to say to him about that drama tour, where Trevor had had replaced John in the band. So Trevor says, when we eventually met, as in me and John Anderson, the first thing John said to me was they would have put a rubber monkey up front just to do those drama dates, you know. I wasn't expecting him to like me, and to this day he probably doesn't, but neither of us let it get in the way of what ended up being a productive meeting. But even so, John caused a lot of problems. He wanted to rewrite some of the lyrics to the album, and you can definitely say, come what may, this album contains some fine examples of John Anderson lyric writing. Just want to read you a couple of examples from the song Hold On, which is the second song on side one. Take the simple smile, such platonic eye, how they drown in incomplete capacity, strangest of them all when the feeling calls, how we drown in stylistic audacity, charge the common ground, round and round and round, we living in gravity. So he was definitely trying to steer Yes into those waters, those very sort of highfalutin, some would say deeply pretentious lyrical waters. And I guess, again, Trevor was trying to maybe steer them into more of a pop direction. So at one point, Trevor had written a lyric to one of the verses of Owner of a Lonely Heart, and John Anderson had rewritten it, and he'd inserted this reference, the eagle in the sky, how we danced one and only. And Trevor says, I would never have written that. And because we hated that lyric so much, Gary Langan and I added in a gunshot after that bit to symbolically shoot down the eagle. We were like, let's shoot the fucking eagle. So somehow the album got made, and of course, Trevor Horn's instincts were right, really, and his pop instincts came to the fore, and they were able to pull off this album, which it wasn't really Yes as people had remembered it, but it sort of cleverly updated the Yes sound, melded it with some aspects of contemporaneous AOR, that kind of Styx, REO Speedwagon, arena rock kind of sound. But on the record, there are various tracks where you can hear them dropping in little references, you know, Yes references. Alan White will kind of, you know, start to shift the meters, you know, the drum rhythms a little bit, added bars here and there. You've also got a lot of very impressive vocal harmony stuff, and, you know, things that definitely link back to albums like Close to the Edge, but it's all refracted through this very sharp contemporary 80s sound, and it was a big hit. But I think to this day, I think there are certain Yes fans who don't really have much time for it at all. They don't really see it as part of the canon. It's almost like a kind of a strange offshoot, really, going off on its own angle. And in a way, it was a bit of a dead end, because apart from Big Generator, which had a few tracks produced by Trevor, you know, this was the end of the relationship really with Trevor Horn, and they were to go back to a much more traditional sound. There are 9 tracks on the album, and I think most of it is pretty successful. Owner of a Lonely Heart, I still think is brilliant to this day. I think it's very overplayed here in the UK. It's a bit of a Radio 2 staple, but it's a song I never get tired of hearing. I think it's beautifully produced. I love that really abrasive guitar solo from Trevor Rabin. It's very, very tight. It's very, very accomplished sounding. I love the sampling. You know, they started to use all kinds of mad samples in it. It was the period where they were doing, you know, Trevor had started doing The Art of Noise, and he was working with Malcolm McLaren on Duck Rock, and he was bringing in all these kind of jagged, strange samples, which juxtaposed with the more melodious side that Yes had. I think Trevor Rabin, a really good singer, really good songwriter, you know, maybe not the best fit for Yes in some ways, but I think it's a very powerful song. Hold On, the second track, that's a bit more of a kind of lurching AOR song, really. There's some strange rhythmical stuff going on, and some nice vocal manipulations too, but it's, I don't know, the guitar in that track is a bit too widdly for me. It's a bit too generic. It Can Happen is better. That starts with a kind of Indian section, sounds like a bit of tambura and sitar, great panoramic keyboards, very Vangelis actually. You know, clearly that was another John Anderson project, wasn't it? The production on this record, it sort of reminds me a little bit of the stuff that Rush was doing in the early 80s, and also maybe think a bit of sort of Bob Ezrin. It's got that widescreen panoramic kind of quality to it. Changes starts with a sort of tubular bells type repeating melody in an odd time signature. That's quite clever, but then it kind of goes into more of a straight 4/4 rock song. Another record that this reminds me of a little bit as well is Discipline by King Crimson. There are certain similarities, you know, ethnic percussion sounds coming through here and there. You know, interesting sounds. Cinema, which was a Grammy-nominated instrumental. This is a real epic. I mean, that was the band name originally, Cinema. They changed to Yes, but they kept this song back as a kind of showcase, really, I think, for the instrumental stuff that they were doing. I think it's really impressive. It's got some really outrageous bass playing from Chris Squire. And then the other huge highlight on the record was the hit single Leave It, which, again, that song just blew my mind when I first heard it. You know, that one and Owner of a Lonely Heart, I just thought were absolutely incredible. Starts with this giddy whirlpool of sort of doo-wop vocal sounds and arrangements. It's very, very tightly recorded and just beautifully rendered, you know, that kind of sonic trickery that Trevor Horn was able to bring to bear on recording. Everything just very, very pristine. It just sounds amazing, and it's a really funky song as well, a funky track, you know, funky bass playing from Chris Squire, really great drumming from Alan White as well. Dips a bit then with Our Song, which again is maybe a bit Foursquare AOR. It does improve as it goes along, and it does end with some quite nice vistas of keyboards. City of Love actually is a big favourite of mine, the second to last song on side 2, where John Anderson turns in a really good, powerful, kind of heavy rock vocal delivery, which apparently impressed Trevor Horn in the studio. You know, John Anderson's vocal style, it's very twinkly, it's very, you know, it's high-pitched, it's not exactly falsetto, but it's got that kind of fey, hippie quality. But on City of Love, he turns in a really, almost sort of, I don't know, sort of power rock kind of vocal sound, very impressive, and great sort of lurching riffs in that song. Brilliant rhythm section again from Chris and Alan, you know, very, very powerful. And then the song ends with this sort of, I don't know, this song Hearts. It's more of a kind of Zippos Aloft kind of stadium rock song, windswept AOR. It's nice enough, but it's maybe not quite to my tastes. The whole album is a bit like that, really. You sort of get the feeling that there was probably another album that Yes could have made with Trevor at the helm, but because of who they were, maybe they weren't quite able to fully get behind that. And I think if you had to pick two songs that really showed the way where they could have gone, it would be Owner of a Lonely Heart and Leave It. Both those tracks have got a certain poppy, funky kind of quality, and the rest of the record struggles to match that. You've got that kind of AOR thing creeping in. But in general, overall, I think what really carries this album is just the sounds and just the production vision of Trevor Horn. I think John Anderson as well. Anyway, 90125 on Atco from 1983. Definitely one of my favourite albums of all time, albeit I think one which is a bit flawed, but certainly an album of its time. And I think this was just that period where Trevor Horn's career was about to go through the roof, so it's certainly an interesting record to listen to in light of all that. Anyway, let me know what you think. Yes, 90125. I suspect this one's going to divide my viewers a little bit, but we'll see anyway. Hope you enjoyed the video. Take care, and I'll see you next time.